time you saw him, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
But he sounds just like you.
He's deciding if that's good when he hears it or not. Okay, good.
So no modeling the supplements then?
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for coming. Tonight, Dr. Aaron is going to talk about, and I laughed at when I was promoting it to everybody. I think he spent his whole lifetime getting ready for this talk, but certainly he has spent the last 3 months getting ready for it. And I think for all of us as doctors, we often will ask a patient, bring in what you're taking, and they literally will bring in sometimes 2 bags full of vitamins in that. And it doesn't matter what we're taking, it matters what we're absorbing. And, you know, probably the research in the last 10 years is about the microbiome, the gut, and what it takes on, and Dr. Aaron is going to do a great job. Like always, send some questions, and if you have them, we'll certainly try to answer them. And then just to pray for our next talk, we're going to talk about kids, and so we're going to talk about, Dr. Letch is going to talk about from pre-birth to 5 years old with kids. Dr. Matt's going to talk about motion in kids. Dr. Aaron's going to talk about 5 to 18 with kids. And then I'm going to talk about mindfulness in kids. And I honestly right now could spend my whole, every minute of every day that I'm not here talking to parents and their kids. I mean, I have so many parents that kids are just struggling like we've never seen before. So we're going to talk about that. So again, it'd be a great talk, and all 4 doctors are going to talk about it. I'm not going to take more time, Dr. Aaron. I'm just excited. I'll learn as I always do from him. He doesn't have his heckler here tonight. The last time he said he was going to share some wisdom, and the person said, it must be a short talk, and so we will not tease him about that. Did I say that again?
I feel like.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron.
All right. Make me debate walking out again. Well, as some of you remember here from a couple years ago, we had given a talk on digestion. You know, a lot of our talks follow the eat well, think well, move well. So, and we like to pick a topic. At the very end of the night, Dr. Bouch will actually talk about our next talk coming up. Tonight, I'm going to be going through, kind of like Dr. Bouch said, I get it all the time. You know, bring me in what you're taking. And if a patient says, boy, I tried that supplement, that vitamin, it didn't work. Well, what happens if you're not absorbing it? And so that'll be part of what our talk's on tonight. So as the talk is titled, You Are What You Absorb. Couple things to start to start here, eat well, think well, move well. And you'll find a lot of our talks follow that. Tonight we're going to be doing more on the eat well. Couple main points. All animals are self-healing and self-regulating, including humans. Humans are 99.5% genetically identical. If that previous statement is correct, is poor health due to genes? Okay. Sometimes yes. A lot of times no. So has anyone here heard the term epigenetics before? So epigenetics, think of it almost like a cookbook. So if I have a cookbook, who decides what gets cooked? Oh, come on in. Thought we wouldn't have hecklers here tonight, but. So if I think of a cookbook, who decides what gets cooked? The chef or the cookbook? Well, the chef decides, and it's the same thing with your genes. So after you have your genetic code, after mom and dad, 2 cells come together, and we have the zygote, and then we form this fully functioning multi-trillion-celled organism, then how the genes get expressed is partially based on our environment. So if I eat right, if I think right, if I move right, or if I don't do those things, I'm going to actually express my genes differently. And you can actually see all the different things around here. Tonight we're going to focus in on diet, but what happens if I work in a factory where I'm around chemicals? What happens if I don't exercise? What happens if my microbiome isn't ideal? All these things actually affect the expression or what's called the phenotype of our body. If you remember from last time, we brought up Hippocrates. I kind of joked around, he probably had a number of sayings, but 2 of my favorite sayings, especially as a chiropractor, look well to the spine for the cause of disease. And he also said all disease begins in the gut. So he's kind of hedging his bet, one or the other. So we'll actually focus on both tonight. Garbage in, garbage out. So we know it as far as if I eat McDonald's every day, I wouldn't be healthy. Your diet isn't only what you eat. It's what you watch, what you listen to, what you read, and the people you hang around. Be mindful of the things you put into your body emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And that's why Dr. Bouch talks a lot about emotional health as well. Because even if you're eating great and exercising, what happens if you have crappy thoughts? And we had mentioned before in one of our last talks, the average person has about 60,000 thoughts. 80% of those are negative. And if you have 80% of 60,000 thoughts that are negative, you're not going to have a positive outlook. A couple of stats here, and I'm trying to get better. I heard one stat, you're supposed to have 5 bullet points or 5 words. You're not supposed to go over that, so I'm getting better at not having so much clutter on my side. So I'm going to start kind of like the nightly news. In the summertime, I like to watch on Sunday nights the end of a golf tournament. And then right after, you have CBS News. And if I watch that for more than a minute, I have to go to counseling. So my next few slides are going to be on how everything is bad. So I apologize for that. But just a couple of health stats. In June 2016, 38% of Americans are obese, including 17% of teenagers. That number is higher now. By 2030, half of adults, 114 million, are expected to be obese. And that's not overweight. Technically, I'm considered overweight. I got to lose 8 pounds to be considered normal. That's over 30 BMI. Over 65, average of 14 prescriptions a year. That's 7 a day. And according to the CDC, 6 in 10 Americans have a chronic disease. 4 in 10 Americans have 2 or more. And this is, next couple of slides actually go into some of the costs. The U.S. spends $3.8 trillion with a T on healthcare annually. The U.S. government took in $3.5 trillion in taxes in 2019, meaning we're spending more on healthcare as a nation than we're actually taking in as taxes. Of course, as the U.S., we'll just print our way out of it. Couple of deaths by risk factor. This is in the world 2017. And what you'll see, a lot of these things up here, they're preventable. So if you look at through the world now, per day you have about 7,000 to 8,000 Americans die. You have about 150,000 deaths in the world every single day. But if I look at high blood pressure, that accounts for just over 10 million deaths a year. Smoking, high blood sugar, air pollution, obesity. So a lot of these things up here, going back to epigenetics, they're within our control. They're not based on our genes. Some of the healthcare costs, and these go back to 2016 is the end of it. So if you see the top line here, the United States. So percent of our GDP, we're spending just under 20% of our gross domestic product on healthcare. And that number doesn't seem to be coming down. You can see the other countries are going up, but not as fast as the U.S. Health consumption expenditures per capita, the U.S., we spend more per person than anywhere else in the world. Because everyone talks about, boy, we don't spend enough on patients here in the U.S., that's why our healthcare isn't as good. No, we dwarf the other countries. The next nearest is Switzerland, but the average, we're almost double the average. A lot of times people ask, where does that come from? I always thought, well, it's due to malpractice and things like that, or maybe we're ordering too many tests, especially doctors in the hospital, and some of that may be true. This is the biggest reason, though, administrative costs. So can you see where we spend next to the nearest country? Look at that. So it's almost like we have less doctors and less nurses, but we have more bosses of bosses of bosses of bosses. So less people to take care of the patients, and that's one of the main driving forces. In fact, this is similar to as far as college costs. So when I was in college way back in the day, I started in 2001, it was going up by 15% a year. And the biggest driver of that was administrative costs. And for all that spending, where do we rank overall? Out of 11 developed countries, we rank number 11. So not exactly getting what we're paying for. Now that I've done my rendition of the news, let's talk about some positives. Here in the U.S., we do very well with emergency medicine. In fact, if I got in a car accident, if I had a surgery, in fact, even here right in Wausau, we have one of the top hospitals in the nation for heart disease. Guess what that is? Aspirus Wausau Hospital. In fact, in the past 20 years, I believe they've been in the top 50, 13 of those. So for emergency medicine, we do really well here in the U.S. However, just like this house burning down, the fire department comes, they put it down. Now, after the fire is burnt down, or after they put it out, do you call them back up the next day and say, "Hey, my house is burnt down. I gotta rebuild it"? Well, no. That's where you would call it construction crew, and that's one of the main deciphering things I'm going to go over tonight. We do really good with emergency, trauma, things like that, but preventative care, we don't do as well here in the U.S. So how did we get here? And there's a lot of different, you can point your finger at a lot of different things. This will be one of the stats. We have 84,000 chemicals here on the market in the U.S. Only 200 have been tested for safety. We have foods versus food-like substances, over-medicated, prescription meds, dwarf wheat, food pyramid. I mean, you have a ton of different things all coming together at one time.
What's the dwarf wheat?
Dwarf wheat. So if you look at our wheat, so if you remember, amber waves of grain, it used to be 4 feet tall. Well, now a lot of the wheat, it's right around 18 inches. So it's dwarf wheat. Now to a farmer, it increases yield, it's great, but it's created a super carbohydrate, super gluten strain,
Okay.
meaning something my gut isn't ready for necessarily. In fact, even when it comes to things like, and I'll actually have another slide on glyphosate or Roundup, gluten's been in bread forever. So 15 years ago, if you asked someone what a gluten is, in fact, there was a jaywalking episode, Jay Leno. He went around and asked people, are you gluten-free? Oh yeah, I'm gluten-free. What's gluten? The bad stuff. Well, no, it's just a protein that helps keep wheat together. The more gluten, the more stretchy it is. But if I keep dumping tons and tons of glyphosate and Roundup, I would almost argue we're more glyphosate or Roundup intolerant than we are gluten intolerant. And that's almost a whole talk in and of itself for another day. Good question. So what this is right here, this is in, Jen had showed me, cut the top off, but it says Reds fed GMO corn after 2 years. Industry-funded studies only last 90 days. This is after they fed them for 2 years. They developed all these tumors. Now the interesting thing about this was printed in Food and Chemical Toxicity. The study was retracted against the author's request. You can't say bad stuff about big agriculture. So, and that's one of the things, even with certain medication, things like that, we don't know the long term because we might only test something for 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or a year. Recommendations are usually years behind the science. That is probably one of my favorite phrases from last year, 2020. You got to believe the science. I believe in science. It's almost become its own religion, secular dogma almost. So back in the 1930s, if you were a medical doctor and you say, I think smoking causes lung cancer, they call you a quack and they take away your license. It wasn't until 1964 that we came out and said, oh, by the way, it does cause lung cancer. So usually science is years behind what's going on. So this guy right here was a researcher out of Minnesota. His name's Ansel Keys. You may have remembered one of his most famous studies, the 7-country studies. Studies 22 countries. His hypothesis was saturated fat causes heart disease. So he threw out the 15 that didn't match his hypothesis, and that became the 7-country study. And if you look at the dietary recommendations that led into 1977, we said, hey, we don't want Americans to eat as much fat. So in the 1980s, eggs are going to kill you. So I had 4 eggs today as part of my breakfast. And then lo and behold, after we've told people that don't eat eggs, eat egg whites, well, back in 2014, we said, oh, by the way, eat butter. Eggs are good for you. So we always like to say try conservative means first, and that includes with things like medication. So according to the British Medical Journal back in 2016, the U.S. has 251,000 deaths a year from medication. That's 700 a day. I mean, if 700 people got hurt in a chiropractic office in a year, we'd be shut down. Even when I get patients in all the time, oh, I've been chewing on Advil for a year or two. Advil and Aleve kill 45 people a day. And that's according to the American Medical Association, 1998. So, I mean, those figures are probably higher now.
I think Dr. Aaron just point out that 251,000 is not dying from a wrong drug or wrong medication. That's not a medical error. That's been given the right drug for the right condition, for the right dosage, and people dying from it. So it's not an error. There's medical errors, that's a whole different number. That these are actually the right drug given for the right condition at the right time.
So, and this is, if you look at the upper estimates, you're getting close to 750,000 people. So, robbing Peter to pay Paul, side effects, are you treating symptoms or are you treating the cause? So, this is a website, and I brought this up before. It's something I like to show to patients. It's called mytaven.com. So, if, kind of like back when I used to study for boards, it was, what was it? My Part 4 boards, it was something like $1,000 to take the class, but they would say, you should write this down, on important parts that might show up on an exam. So mytaven.com, it's kind of cool where you can plug in a medication, and then if you click calculate, it'll actually show you potential nutritional deficiencies. So let's take one of the most common, omeprazole. Does anyone know what that is? That's an acid reflux medication. Okay, Prilosec, little purple pill. Well, let's look at the nutrient. The cool thing about this, because everyone wants studies nowadays, if you believe in something, you don't need research, but if you don't, you need research. So here's the PubMed references. So these are the things that taking stomach acid blockers can create: B12 deficiencies, calcium, magnesium, zinc, folic acid, probiotics, and iron. In fact, the more I delve into the research, calcium and iron definitely. The other minerals, it's kind of, well, we think they do, we think they don't. These are just a couple of them that say, yeah, potentially a lot of your minerals. So, and I'll get into this from you are what you absorb. So if I'm taking an acid blocker like a lot of Americans, I'm going to have trouble breaking down proteins, and I'm going to have trouble absorbing minerals. So not a good problem if you have osteoporosis in the family. This was, and I believe this one was Zantac. So you have different classes of acid blockers. You have things like Tums. You have like a Prilosec, omeprazole, but you also have H2 blockers, Zantac. This one, potentially heart attack. Then they came out and said like a year after that, no, it doesn't cause heart attack, but it may cause cancer. So I don't know which one's better. One of the things to keep in mind, so if I go back, so Dr. Bouch, I believe his major was chemistry. So I like general physics instead of calc-based, so I was a chemistry minor, I was bio major. But this was one of the things, and if you go in and zoom in, you'll see the Krebs cycle in that. 1 billion reactions a second in every cell. I mean, our innate intelligence is so unbelievably intelligent, our human brains can't grasp it. But if I stop one process up here with, say, a substance or medication, I may block this process, or I may block this, or I may block this. And that's why anytime that you take something, are you treating the cause or are you treating side effects of it? Because with every medication you're going to eventually affect more of these processes. So today we'll focus in on digestion, like I mentioned. 3 main concepts, and I'll try to hammer more of what I remember my dad when he used to talk, and he taught university accounting for a couple of years. He'd always say, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. And so some of my talks trying to put everything together of all my jibber jabber. So fire department versus construction crew. I always like to think of us more as a construction crew. So if I have, like, someone comes in and they have, they got in a car accident, they broke their pelvis. Do I want to adjust them? Probably not. I want to send them to the hospital. But then after that, how are they going to rehab? What's their pelvis? Things like that. So as chiropractors, whether it's adjusting or nutritional, I always think of us as the construction crew. Inflammatory gut condition versus poor absorption, we'll go into that. And then we'll also go into chemical nutritional versus mechanical neurological problems. Because sometimes with things like acid reflux, and you'll find that's kind of what I wanted to center my talk on, what happens if my acid reflux isn't from a nutritional problem, it's actually from a mechanical problem. And by mechanical, I mean from the spine. So the gut is under control of the nervous system. I think most people would agree that our brain and spinal cord control all of our body. But if I look between the brain and spinal cord, the nerves that actually control everything come right out of there, and they go to all the organs. So let's say in 11 years, pretty much every day I have a patient that I've been working with that says, I came in for mid-back pain and all of a sudden my acid reflux went away. I came in for low back pain and my constipation went away. It's not always the case. I was joking around, I can't adjust a person out of a McDonald's lifestyle. You can have a perfect spine, but if you eat McDonald's every day, you're still going to have some stomach problems. But this is where we always start. And in fact, when you look at the history of chiropractic, it was never based on back pain. It was based on protecting the spine to protect the nervous system. Kind of neat, this study now is just over 9 years old. It's called the Ogura study, pretty popular one. But we can actually prove how chiropractic affects the autonomic or sympathetic nervous system using a PET scan. So any of you that want to nerd out, I can hand this to later. The process of digestion, so little joke in here while I've been rattling on. Laughter is the best medicine unless you have diarrhea. So process of digestion. So just an overview, starts in the mouth, goes down the esophagus, goes to the stomach, small intestines, and eventually large intestine and out the body. So if we take a look at where food goes in, and I almost like to think of the digestive system as basically outside of the body. You know, once I absorb nutrients in, that's what actually goes into the body. The process of digestion and the purpose of it is to break down nutrients. So if I look at my three major categories, I have carbohydrates that need to be broken down into glucose, lipids into fatty acids and glycerol, and proteins into amino acids. Okay, digestion starts in the mouth. You know, anyone ever been told chew your food 22 bites? Okay, I don't always do that. Amylase breaks down carbs in the mouth. Even smelling certain foods causes the body to release certain enzymes. So, you know, as far as digestion, even in the brain, does anyone remember the Pavlov dogs experiment? You know, they ring a bell when they fed it, and eventually all they'd have to do is ring the bell and the dog would salivate. So the esophagus, it's a 10-inch muscular tube that pushes food down the gut. That's why you can be upside down and you can still swallow food. The lower esophageal sphincter, that's what separates your esophagus and the stomach. Very important, stomach pH is very acidic. So this is on a logarithmic scale. So if you guys go back to physics, you know, maybe horror stories for some of you, but you know, it went from 0 to 14. Right in the middle was water, that was 7, that was neutral. And as I get more acidic, 6 would be 10 times more acidic, 5 would be 100 times, 4 would be 1,000 times. So if you look at that stomach pH 1.5 to 3.5, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of times more acidic than water. It's meant to be, and we have what are called goblet cells that produce mucus, and that's what protects the stomach. So why do you feel acid reflux? Well, if this valve here pops open, that lower esophageal sphincter, and it splashes against the esophagus, that's not lined in mucus, and that's where you feel acid reflux. So you have chief cells that release pepsinogen. You need hydrochloric acid to turn it into pepsin. That's what breaks down proteins. So let's say I'm taking an acid blocker. Am I going to break down my proteins adequately? And I would argue, you know, things like osteoporosis, we always think calcium, calcium, calcium. Well, if I look at bones, they're half protein. Well, if I'm not absorbing protein as I get older, yeah, I'm definitely going to be prone. I can take all the calcium I want, but without enough protein, it doesn't matter. Parietal cells release hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor to absorb B12. So as far as energy goes, that's why sometimes people taking a lot of those blockers, they might be lacking energy because you're not absorbing B12. So if I have a good strong acid, it's going to kill microorganisms, it's going to denature proteins, it's going to activate pepsinogen into pepsin, and it's going to help me break down proteins. On to the small intestine. So main function is to absorb nutrients. It's 20 feet long. It's got some cool names, duodenum, or I used to call it the duodenum before I knew better, jejunum and ileum, and it uses pancreatic enzymes and bile from the liver. So this is just the start of it. This was from an old talk. I thought it was kind of neat. So this right here is Darth Vader. So you have what's called the ampulla of Vader. So I try to use Star Wars to remember things. But you can see, so this right here, your stomach sits right here, your liver and gallbladder right here. And so the liver, where it releases bile into the gallbladder, and eventually the pancreas, they actually deliver what they need to right in the first part of the small intestine. Now, so the stomach's really acidic. This is where we start to alkalize it, meaning we don't want super acidic acid going all the way through. So this is where we'll actually start to see the pH rise. And as it rises, we start to absorb our vitamins, minerals, and proteins and fatty acids. Then we get to the large intestine. The main function is to reabsorb water, and it is 5 to 7 feet long. So, importance of the gut. We call this the second brain, your enteric nervous system. 80% of the immune system, I've heard studies say 70%, it's all over the place, but this is if I have an unhealthy gut, I'm going to have an unhealthy immune system. Okay? 100 trillion bacteria, in fact, that number may be going higher, but that's why they call it as far as the second brain, with all of the, as far as how it's involved with the immune system and nervous system. So in an ideal scenario, we're going to eat our food. It takes 6 to 8 hours for food to go through the stomach and small intestine, up to 36 hours for undigested food to finish going through the colon. In an ideal scenario, most nutrients are absorbed, no distress is felt, person feels okay, and they have daily bowel movements. Okay? Pretty simple. When things go wrong, anyone here ever work in construction? Okay, I'm the only one. Well, anyone have a CDL here? It's kind of funny, relating to patients. I can tell them I went to school for 8 years and no one cares. They find out I have a CDL if they're a truck driver. Oh, what else do I need to do? So, kind of like I always use the joke, you go overseas and you see someone from Wisconsin just because you can relate to them. Hey, where should I eat? Even though they're not from there either. Just because I like the when things go wrong. So, someone who constructed who really wanted a throne, you can see the toilet up here. And this is, if you want to waste some time, go to Pinterest fails. This is my all-time favorite Pinterest fail. You see the lovely Cookie Monster cupcakes and how they usually turn out. So gut testing, let's say things are going on. There are a couple things you can do: leaky gut test, scoping the GI tract, especially if you're in the hospital, allergy testing, they scratch your skin in the hospital. In fact, I just had a patient yesterday and I still have to vet the information where she's going to, but there are actually tests where you can actually get online where they'll do a blood spot test, send it off, and they'll give you a list of how many foods you may be potentially have an allergy to. So kind of neat as far as more at-home stuff. Now, when I use the term allergy, I should say the term sensitivity. So a true allergy is what's called an IgE response. These are people who are like celiac. So if you're celiac, you can't have gluten. But let's say you get some distress when you eat dairy. Well, it may be a sensitivity more than a true allergy. So some of the most common: milk, soy, peanuts, shellfish, eggs, sesame, and tree nuts. Sometimes with different sensitivities, you can actually eliminate it, and after you heal the gut, you can reintroduce them. So some of the patients we have out there that do different gut testing with sensitivities, oh my gosh, I can only eat 4 foods. Eventually you can start bringing things back in as you heal the gut. Acid reflux. So this is where I'll go into a couple of different scenarios if things go wrong. So normally we should be producing 1.5 to 2 liters of acid a day, but as we get older, we produce less stomach acid. So is it more common to see acid reflux medication being used by older individuals or younger? Usually older, because as I'm producing less stomach acid, I'm more apt to get things like acid reflux. In fact, for a lot of people, when I tell them acid reflux is caused by too little stomach acid and not too much, it's almost like telling them there's no, well, I was going to say something with Santa Claus, but kids watching and Easter, okay. But no, it's kind of one of those things that you've been told something your whole life, and then kind of like eggs are going to kill you for 30 years, and then you're told actually no, they're good for you. It's almost you fight it a little bit. So, and this is where acid reflux, if it takes place, this valve pops open. It's partially neurologically controlled. You have a nerve called the vagus nerve. In fact, right now we're doing certain surgeries where they put a little stimulator in. Well, you can stimulate it by humming, getting adjusted. There's a lot of other things. But the vagus nerve, and you have what are called those sympathetic nerves. If you remember back that nerve chart, that's how the stomach's controlled neurologically. But it's also pH controlled. And when things go wrong, if I don't have enough stomach acid and I start feeling it, not a good feeling. TUMS is one way. Proton pump inhibitors like omeprazole and histamine blockers like Zantac are your 3 most common. Remember how I said before, if you're not absorbing or if you're taking something, potentially you might not be absorbing these nutrients. So kind of going back to that slide, if you were to write something out, mytaven.com, every once in a while I just like exploring it with certain patients where, legally I'm not going to tell them to get off or to take a medication because I didn't prescribe it to them. But I am going to tell them, hey, what medications are you on? I might pick a couple. Oh, it says this one causes a zinc deficiency. Hey, you might want to look at adding zinc to your diet. So kind of a neat website to explore. So what are some natural solutions? Well, for starters, are you supposed to be eating when you're really stressed? You want to be eating when you're in what's called a parasympathetic state, when you're nice and relaxed. Ideally, I'm going to limit my liquids. I thought drinking water was good. Ideally, a half an hour before, half an hour after, or even longer than that. Try to only have a few ounces of any liquid with your meal. If I want to try to lower stomach acid, apple cider vinegar has been used for hundreds of years. And it's just what's called acetic acid. You can take a teaspoon or 2, you mix it with a little bit of water, and you take it at the start of a meal. That's another way. Sometimes you can get acid reflux. Remember how HCl, so we have plenty of hydrogen in the body, but where do we get the chloride from? Well, what happens if I've been on a super low salt diet? Okay, Sometimes you actually need to add a little bit of salt to make hydrochloric acid. Lack of zinc. And if I go back to this one right here, remember how taking acid reflux medication leads to potentially low zinc levels? But I need zinc to make hydrochloric acid. It starts one of those feedback loops. So and that's why one of those, we'll get patients that are on it, and they used to say on the box, don't take longer than 6 weeks, and now I'm seeing a year because it could lead to fractures in that. If I look at taking this, I have some patients that have taken this for 5 or 10 years, for a long, long time. These are the products. So I will do some shameless plugs here because patients ask me all the time, well, if I don't want to go on Walmart or Amazon, what do you guys use here? Zypan is probably my favorite supplement. Unless a person's taking omeprazole or Prilosec, then I'll just have them take Multizyme. Zypan is Multizyme with a little bit of betaine hydrochloride. Okay, so it helps lower stomach acid. This is just pancreatic enzymes. So I don't bring it with me anymore because Dr. Bouch shoots me bad looks, but so a number of years ago I finished the Milwaukee Burger Challenge. So they bring you out this burger. It's probably 3 pounds and you have 30 minutes to eat it. And it's kind of one of those things in healthcare. We tell people to do things, but we don't necessarily follow what we tell people. I took several of these before it so I could finish it, and I got my t-shirt. Stomach was a wreck for about a week, but it was worth it for a t-shirt. Acid reflux natural solutions, as a chiropractor, we're always going to say check the spine. Or let's say a person isn't getting adjusted. At the very least, this posture right here, which we see more and more common, get people to start doing things like shoulder rolls, even using a foam roller in the mid-back. Because the more and anyone who is in here in sports, you get done with a race. I ran the 800 in high school. My coach never said bend over like this. He'd say arms back like this because that opens up the lungs. It also opens up the nerves that go to those organs. So another thing that can go wrong, peptic ulcers. So NSAIDs, does anyone know what NSAIDs are? Which are Aleve, Advil, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, pretty common. H. pylori, has anyone ever heard of this? Okay, this is kind of a cool story. This is why I put it in here. Be a little bit entertaining. So this is Dr. Barry Marshall. He's known as the guinea pig doctor. He didn't operate on guinea pigs, but he did test something on himself. So he was an Australian internist. In the early 80s, he started working with a pathologist, and that pathologist had discovered that H. pylori, which is a type of gut bacteria, was overrun in the guts of ulcer and stomach cancer patients. Okay? Now, he couldn't prove that H. pylori caused ulcers in mice, and that's why sometimes mice studies can be misleading, because it doesn't affect mice like it affects us. So what do? He mixed up a mixture and drank it down himself. And within a few days, he started to have symptoms of an ulcer. In fact, for his work, he won the 2005 Nobel Prize in Medicine for that. So kind of neat, trusting your gut instinct. Antibiotics, and this is one of the things, so and I know sometimes when I started my talk, it's like, oh, geez, he's just bashing on medication. No, medicine is great. Remember, like I said, like the fire department. So this is a case where if someone had a really bad overgrowth of that, antibiotics could literally save a person's life because potentially it could lead to stomach cancer. So when I had cellulitis in my leg, I was over in Vietnam. I had an injury that I didn't clean out properly, and I had cellulitis. Yeah, antibiotic saved my leg. After an antibiotic, though, what are you supposed to take? Probiotic, yep. Okay, so some of the natural solutions for ulcers: vitamin E, vitamin C, zinc, aloe vera, natural honey, licorice. There's a number of things. We'll use what's called Gastrix in here. It has okra in it. And okra, it looks like a green bean. It's actually good for the gut. So these are just a couple of different, and there's a number of different supplements you can use for things like ulcers. We use Gastrix, okra pepsin. Chlorophyll is actually good for that as well. So I didn't want to go too much in detail on those. Just a little bit more about okra. Looks kind of like a green bean. Constipation's one of my favorite movies. If you remember the scene, should have won an Oscar. Dumb and Dumber. That's where he was on the toilet, had a little bit too much. He was trying to steal the girl of his best friend. So fewer than 3 bowel movements a week for constipation. So I can use something medically like a Miralax, which helps draw more liquids, more water to the colon. I can also use a couple of things naturally. Super aloe is probably one of our go-to. Like if I give a person 2 or 3 of those, I'm going to tell them to be home. Don't be driving on that. Don't take a road trip. Things like magnesium, whole food fiber can also help with constipation. What about mechanically? So going back to one of those slides where I said, boy, is it nutritional, is it mechanical? Yeah, the nerves from the lower mid-back here go right to the colon, your lumbar spine nerves. So what happens if a person sits all day long? What happens if a person sits all day long behind the wheel of a truck? That repetitive trauma. So I kind of go back, and this was a number of years ago, had a 39-year-old truck driver came in for low back pain, once a week bowel movements, taking magnesium just on Saturday mornings. That was his weekly bowel movement, which he explained was normal. And I explained that's not normal for human physiology. I adjusted him twice, and he started having 2 a day. He was not happy with me. He was actually very upset because he's an over-the-road truck driver. Which an adjustment doesn't last forever. I told him, give it a week or a month, you'll be constipated again, and I just didn't adjust that area again. So, some of the more serious diseases out there, and I'm not going to go too much in depth on these, but leaky gut, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, diverticulitis, candida, a lot of these different things, as I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of things going in that cause these. Antibiotics, glyphosate, Western diet, very pro-inflammatory, NSAIDs, chronic stress, even things like ultra marathons. I mean, there's been some cases where, so if I'm running away from the tiger, the last thing that my body's thinking about is digesting food. So what does it do? In fact, the first time I gave one of these talks and I was really nervous, how did it feel in my stomach? Feel almost upset? Yeah, your body's literally turning off stomach acid, it's shunning blood away. And if I do that for a long period of time, if I'm not getting blood flow to an area, that area can actually die. So you've seen people, ultra marathons are like 100 miles long. In fact, even if you go back to the story of the first marathon, the guy's running from the battle of, 300, and he runs back into marathon 25 miles away, and he yells Nike, which means victory, and he died. So it's kind of saying we shouldn't be doing marathons. I've done 4 of them, but you get a t-shirt with them, so. Some of the more serious diseases. So Crohn's is definitely one of those. And Crohn's, right now they say it doesn't have a cure. I'm going to go with anything that ends in itis, like ulcerative colitis and different inflammatory diseases. Well, could I do some things to reduce my inflammatory profile? So I got tested in October, my C-reactive protein. I did some omega-6-3 testing. Yeah, if my inflammatory profile is too high, I'm going to start to watch my inflammatory foods. I like Qdoba. That's my guilty pleasure. I'm going to watch stuff like that, and I'm going to have more anti-inflammatory foods. Now, obviously, things like this, when it's this bad, you're going to be under medical supervision anyways. You're usually going to be taking a number of medications for this. These are some of the anti-inflammatory foods, and if you look at all these foods, I mean, these are foods we should be eating anyways. Different greens, cruciferous vegetables, ginger, salmon, leafy greens. So most of us know we should be eating these. Now, if we're at the fair in Wisconsin, we throw them all and fry them up, deep fry, put butter on them, then we eat them. What's that? Well, exactly, but they taste better. I had one mentor tell me, if it tastes good, don't eat it. I mentioned Mytaven. This is another slide. If you were to star something, write it down. So glutamine is a amino acid. And so if you look at, we were taught when I was in school, we had 20 amino acids. Now they say we have 21 to 22. Back when I was a kid, we had 9 planets. Now we have 8. So everything changes. But glutamine is to your gut what protein powder is to your muscles. So if I have an inflammatory gut condition, like a leaky gut, or I've taken a test where it says, oh, boy, your gut's not healthy, I might want to look at taking some extra glutamine. Typically, you're going to take 5 grams a day. 5 grams seems to be the magical dosage for a lot of things, like creatine or leucine or glutamine. If I'm really unhealthy and I'm under the supervision of a naturopath, they might have me take 20 to 30 grams of this a day. But this, for an inflammatory gut, this is probably one of the top things you can take. It's also vegan friendly, so some are vegans out there. So this is, if you look at the different amino acids, you have your 9 essential, and I had mentioned this one of our last talks, you only have 4 essentials you need. You need essential vitamins, essential minerals, essential fatty acids, and essential amino acids. Essential means your body can't produce it. You have to ingest it. So here's your essential. Glutamine is what's known as a conditionally essential amino acid, meaning if I'm under a ton of stress and I have some gut conditions, I need to take it. I can't just produce it. And this looked really sciencey, so I thought I'd put it up there. Part of why I put it for glutamine, if you look at a lot of these foods, milk, cheese, egg, yogurt, meat, so someone who's vegan, vegetarian, may not be getting enough glutamine. Sometimes that's where you need a supplement. And as I tell people, you need to, a supplement's meant to supplement the diet, not replace it. So medical solutions for gut issues, so let's say a person did have Crohn's disease, they may need immunosuppressants, corticosteroids. But I always think of those medications that as a crutch, get you through when the house is burning down, but what are you going to do to build up the house after? Natural solutions for gut issues. So for a lot of people, just a plant-based diet. Fiber, the more I read on it, it's almost like you have a pro-fiber crowd and an anti-fiber crowd, especially if you're on like a carnivore diet. So I would put an asterisk by that. Probiotics, healthy fats, fermented foods, glutamine, reduce stress. I mean, stress is involved with everything, and especially different gut issues. Here's some different foods as far as soluble, insoluble. So this is when we think of insoluble, that's things that aren't going to break down. Like if I'm eating a bunch of green bean pods and that, and I want to try to clean out the gut. If I want to feed the gut bacteria, that's where soluble fiber comes in. A lot of your nuts, seeds, apple pectin is really good. Okay, this is, and going back to a talk you gave a couple years ago, I had mentioned some things on candida. So let's say I have candida, I have a white tongue, coated tongue, people that are prone to yeast infections, things like that. The top two, garlic and coconut oil. So if I know I have some gut issues and I have overgrowth of yeast and candida, have some garlic, have some coconut oil. Really good for you. Garlic, I know years ago here, I was coming down with a cold or flu or something, but heaven forbid you have that nowadays and you come in here. But it was a Sunday night, and I had heard you're supposed to take half a clove of garlic, which is good for the immune system. And I thought, I'm a man, I need a full clove. And I didn't know the difference between a clove and a bulb at the time. And so I took a full bulb, and I broke it into my soup, and I'm eating chunks of, there had to be about a dozen of them. I felt awesome Monday morning, but I was in the back room there, and I heard people talking about someone cooking or garlic or something, and we ended up going through 2 bottles of citrus spray in the office, but I never got sick, so garlic is good for the immune system.
Good for friends.
Say you want to break up with someone, start eating a lot of garlic. So a couple of different gut issues. So inflammation, that's where we're going to use things like a fish oil. And while we're on the topic here, you are what you absorb. So this is what I always want patients, and before we started the video here, I was going through with some people earlier. You get what you pay for. So in the days of Amazon, I know people are going to look online, but look for something that's quality. Typically when you look at a fish oil, and I'll try to make it a little bit closer here. Jen, can you see that? Okay. So a couple things that you'll see on there, EPA, DHA. So if I take a look at a quality fish oil, it's going to contain more of what's called EPA and DHA in there. If I have a cheap fish oil, it may put just an asterisk on it. It won't tell me. But if I have 80 to 90% of it, EPA is what works like Advil without the side effects. DHA is what helps the brain. So I had gone with a gentleman a number of years ago. He brought me in his Walmart gummy. For every one of our pills, he needed 40 gummies. So that's where we tell people, you get what you pay for. The equivalent of this, of what costs about $1 a day, just over that for 3 pills, Lovaz, the prescription fish oil, costs about $11. But once the FDA puts their stamp on it, it costs a lot more. So on a good quality fish oil, what you're looking for is EPA and DHA. Okay, as long as the majority, and then usually on a good fish oil, it'll be darker, the bottle will be opaque, and it'll usually say molecularly distilled or USP approved. So there's a couple things, but the main things look at EPA, DHA. As far as you are what you absorb, last thing on a quality multivitamin, usually you can look at, as I had gone through minerals earlier, the 2 things you can start looking at right off the bat is calcium and magnesium. So if I zoom in here, so if you can see, right between mark and finger there, I have magnesium and calcium. Generally, as long as the calcium isn't in a carbonate form and the oxide is, or magnesium isn't in an oxide form, it's going to be more bioavailable, meaning you're going to absorb more of it. So those are the two things that I typically look for on a mineral supplement to see, how good is the supplement. The last thing sometimes I'll go into is I'll look at the B9 or the folate in it. So a lot of cheap supplements have what's called folic acid. In fact, we've added to our wheat since the late 90s. Your body has zero need for folic acid. It's got to convert it into folate. So if you look at Latin for foliage, so just eat deep leafy greens. But if I have one of those, if I've done a 23andMe genetic test and I have what's called a MTHFR, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase problem, I may only convert 20% of that folic acid into folate. So kind of when I go down a supplement, I'll look at the calcium, I'll look at magnesium, I'll look at the folate too. Make sure it says folate, methylfolate, and not folic acid. So, and we'll do that a lot with our moms to be, because folic acid is really important, or folate is important, not folic acid. So just a couple things as far as absorption. That was one of the main things I wanted to get in, and this slide helped remind me. Intermittent fasting, so the last couple slides here. So let's say if my gut has 80% of the immune system around it, and I want to help reset a gut, one of the easiest things you can do is just quit eating. And I know in our country, if you go from breakfast to lunch without eating, that's called a fast. This is one of the things I typically do, especially on my work days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, when we're busier in the morning. I don't eat usually till 12:30. Okay, I shorten my eating window to about 6 to 8 hours a day. When people ask me, well, are you sure that's safe in that? And obviously, if you have some health issues, you should do it under the guidance of whether it's your chiropractor, your osteopath, your medical doctor, your naturopath. But this is the longest fast ever. 382 days without eating. So just over a year. A gentleman was 456 pounds when he started, and his final weight was 180. And this was done at the University of Scotland in 1965. So a person can go a long time without eating. Still not, and this, that talk I'd given was also on losing weight, and that intermittent fasting is one of the things that we'll do at the start of the year if a person isn't losing weight. Also, our last talk, we had talked about the liver, helps with the liver. We had gone through phase 1, phase 2 liver detox. If I want to detox the body, what are some easy things I can do? Don't eat crap for a week. Sorry if that word is offensive. But half your body weight in water a day and lots of cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous, if you guys remember from our last talk, we talked about the liver. The liver needs amino acids, it needs B vitamins for phase 1 and phase 2 detox to work. But cruciferous vegetables, your broccoli, your cauliflower, your Brussels sprouts, are unbelievably healthy for the liver. The only time we have to worry about it is sometimes with some thyroid issues, but other than that, for 99% of people, it's really healthy. This is what we do in our office. I did one at the start or end of December, start of January. This is just our standard process detox. I usually do these 3 times a year. Keep in mind, if my immune system, which in the past year we've talked about immune system, vitamin D ad nauseum, but what happens if I have an unhealthy gut, and this is 70 to 80% of my immune system? Detoxing the body and gut periodically is really healthy. In summary, last 2 slides here, fire department or construction crew. So some of the stuff I went over tonight was the construction crew. So I'll use the example of things like Crohn's and that again. Yeah, if I have Crohn's, I'm usually under medical supervision by a GI doc, my medical doctor. What am I doing to rebuild the body after I put the fire out though? Okay. Do I have a mechanical or neurological problem? If I have a spinal issue, I could potentially have a gut issue. And like I mentioned earlier, we can't adjust a person out of a crappy diet, but you can't diet yourself out of a crappy spine. So you both basically need both. Finally, the human body is self-healing and self-regulating. I think now us and New Zealand are the only countries that allow direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. And by the time you get out of high school, I think we think that the body's designed to break down and we're going to be old on tons of meds and can't enjoy our hobbies. Now, the body's incredible as far as healing, but you got to give it what it needs. So in conclusion here, keys to healing. As you've noticed with a lot of our talks here, eat well, think well, move well. Today we focus on the eat well component. Healthy whole foods, supplements, plenty of water. Think well, and this is where Dr. Bouch likes to go into. Meditation, prayer, relaxing music. I added this one, avoid toxic people. Holy moly, I think that's important. And then the last one, move well. Get adjusted, stretch, exercise. You guys remember this scene? Indiana Jones. Yep. You must choose, but choose wisely. So I threw a lot of stuff. You guys were very attentive. I'm glad no one fell asleep. I'm glad I didn't get heckled. I'm going to bring Dr. Bouch up here to introduce our next talk. Yeah,